Hello. There's no one watching yet, I don't think. This is my first time doing Facebook Live video, so super stoked. Oh. Okay, according to my time, it's 1 o'clock, so hello, I'm Andy Chrisman, and I'm here today to talk about living with borderline personality disorder. But before I get started, I will tell you a little bit about me as a person, because I am more than just a mental health diagnosis. I'm 31 years old. I know I look like I'm about 20. The purple hair doesn't help, but it's kind of my trademark now. I'm the proud parent of a properly named cat named Gabby, who is wandering around here and may make an appearance during the video because he's very needy like that. I have an associate's degree in digital media, which is a mixture of graphic and web design. I used to work as a web programmer at an advertising agency before I became disabled. And I'm very into social media now. I love Twitter and Facebook and everything. You can follow me on Twitter at AndyBPDWarrior. I'm also started making YouTube videos, which you can find by searching for BPD Warrior. You're welcome. Oh, people are talking to me. That makes me feel so excited. Hi, Rudy. Okay. I'm very geeky, as you can tell, which means I played a lot of video games in my day. In my day, I mean, like, yesterday. I'm working on Fallout 3 again, because I like playing the same games over and over again. I'm an artist. Oh, here comes the cat. I'm an artist. I come from an artistic family. So this is my kitty, Gabby. He doesn't know he's famous now. I come from an artistic family, and I cannot, Fallout, yes, geeky people. I cannot draw to save my life, but actually art was a really important part of my recovery, and I started doing abstracts and textures and different designs, and the Mighty has asked me to share some of my stuff with you. I couldn't get any of my canvases, they were in storage, so I'll show you some of the other work I have. This is a little pillow box, it's for like a greeting, for like a gift card. That's just a little design I did. These are some greeting cards. This one is a water marbled greeting card. The color's probably not great, but it's just dropping a little bit of paint in the water and lightly putting the paper over the water, and that allows me to do the water marbling. This is my favorite type of way to paint, and it's a crackled texture that I use, actually, Elmer's glue, of all things, to put something on there. He does not need something to eat. He is fat kitty. And this is another one with the glue, and it's also been texturized using a Cuttlebug machine, which embosses it. So that's there. This is one of my, I love the way these turn out. This is actually the background I lay down when I'm painting, and I just keep the background, and it gets messier and messier, and then it becomes its own art in itself. And those are some of my favorite pieces. This one's one of the earlier ones that I did, and it's glass, so I'm going to kind of try to hold it at an angle so you guys can see it. But it's actually using rubbing alcohol as a dropper on the painting to kind of do some texturizing. And the final one I'm going to show today is this heart here. What I did was I painted the background, and then I made this design out of tape of the heart and the arrow, then painted over it with black, and then pulled the tape off once the paint had dried, leaving you to see a little bit of the background. So that's the kind of artwork I do. I also do something a little crafty. I do these little mental health awareness ribbons, which you can buy on Etsy if anyone is interested. I'm pointing at my boob, but they are mental health awareness ribbons, and it was really inspiring because last year at NAMI Walks, Virginia, we used them as something to give away. Me and a team of volunteers made them and gave them out to over 2,000 people. So it was really inspiring to see people, oh, there goes the cat, to see people wearing the project that I had kind of come up with and started on our own. So, as I mentioned, NAMI, I kind of work for NAMI, volunteer/work. I'm a peer-to-peer facilitator. I'm an interim voice speaker. And interim Voice is my favorite program, and that's how I found out about NAMI. And what we do is we go into the local psychiatric units and to talk to police officers and EMS workers at crisis intervention team trainings, which are for them to learn more about dealing with people in crisis. And we share our story of recovery from mental illness. And so I kind of like to think of myself as a voice for the voiceless because of stigma. A lot of people can't talk about their mental illness. So I talk a lot about it. It's hard to get me to shut up about it, for the truth be told. So now I'll kind of go through the story of how I was diagnosed with BPD and my history with mental illness. When I was 13, I became suicidally depressed in the winter of 1999. I was actually cyberbullied before cyberbullying even had a name because I had a blog. Though we didn't call them blogs back then, we called them online journals because I'm legitimate old school internet. I can remember paying per hour for AOL, so this was back in the day with modems and everything. And I had some girls from my school, so I was talking about my depression and my suicidal ideation when some of the girls from my school decided to start leaving anonymous messages on my blog saying things like, "You're making up your depression for attention. If you were really depressed, you'd kill yourself, and the world would be better off without you." I still suffer from PTSD due to this. We all have nightmares. They're not nearly as frequent as they used to be, but my nightmares would cause me to wake up not knowing whether I had graduated from high school. I might wake up and try to start getting ready for the bus, thinking I had to go to school that day. It's affected me severely, so I'm definitely an advocate for no cyberbullying. It's very intense. So around that time, I started self-harming, and my friends did tell my guidance counselor that I was self-harming, and she called me in to her office in the last 5 minutes of the school day and asked me, "Are you cutting?" And I said no, and it was winter, so I was wearing long sleeves, and she said, "Okay, you can get the bus." She didn't call my mom, she didn't ask me to pull my sleeves up or anything, she just let me go. So again, I had been invalidated, and finally I had enough of the cyberbullying, and I went to my mom and I told her about how I had been feeling and about the bullying, and she told me we'd get me into therapy, but we never talked about it again after that. Years later, she said that she thought I was over it, but obviously I wasn't, and I felt more invalidated, like people just didn't believe me. I was later diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder. That means I get more depressed during the winter or when there's a lack of sunlight around the earth. I use a sun lamp to help balance that out, and I do take antidepressants. And I also can happen with just being rainy for a while. The weather really affects my mood strongly. So moving on, when I was 20, I was engaged, which was a horrible mistake, but I was engaged to a man who was verbally abusive, and I started having trouble with my psychiatric problems and wanted to get help. But he was insistent that if I took pills, that would make me a different person and that he wouldn't love me anymore. So that was further invalidation. I talk about invalidation a lot because it's very important for BPD. So it was further invalidation that I didn't really have a mental illness and that people thought I was making it up. Around that time, I started having chronic stomach pain that no doctor would diagnose. I saw a gastroenterologist, urologist, gynecologist, and no one could diagnose my pain, but they were more than happy to give me pain medication, a few years ago before they got as strict. So I got pain medication after pain medication after pain medication, and I'm in this abusive relationship, and I'm taking these pain pills, and it doesn't seem so bad. And that's when I first started struggling with addiction, first to opiates, and later to alcohol and other substances. Years later, I would be working in advertising, and my life would finally seem like it was going on track, but it wasn't. Unfortunately, in 2009, again, I became suicidally depressed in the winter, and I actually had to be hospitalized in a crisis stabilization unit. I took a leave off of work, and at that time, I was really into my two favorite hobbies: drinking, playing World of Warcraft up to 17 hours a day. I had a serious addiction to World of Warcraft and alcohol. Due to my drinking, I was keeping my roommate out, and I got kicked out of my living arrangements, and that's when I first attempted suicide. I almost completed my first suicide attempt, but my liver had completely failed. I had been an overdose, and my liver had completely failed. I was transferred to another hospital and was told I would need a liver transplant. But by some miracle, my liver actually came back on. But instead of valuing my life after this miracle, I actually got worse. I became out of control. My substance abuse skyrocketed. I had multiple more suicide attempts. I didn't know, around that time, my therapist, that's when they first suggested that I might have borderline personality disorder, which is ridiculous, because my personality is just fine. That's what I told them. But I do have borderline personality disorder. So to tell you a little bit about BPD, BPD is access to personality disorders, access 1 emotion or mood disorders like depression or bipolar disorder, and it's a disorder of emotional dysregulation. My brain does not have the ability to regulate my emotions like most people do. I have a wider range of emotions, like I can experience happiness at a higher rate than most people can, and I can experience sadness at a stronger depth than most people can. Excuse me. But then I don't have the ability to regulate how I go between those emotions and can fluctuate very quickly. And I also lack the coping skills to deal with that. I didn't know how to cope, so that's why I went towards self-destructive behaviors. There are actually 256 different ways that you can have a makeup of borderline personality disorder, so my specific history is not the same as everyone else. BPD is thought to be caused in highly sensitive people by a series of invalidating events, which that's why I share my history. Growing up, I went through a lot of invalidation, and that's why I shared all the invalidation I went through about my mental illness and why it really caused the BPD. So some of the symptoms of BPD include impulsivity, which for me really came out as suicide attempts. I would often get in a fight with my boyfriend and grab a bottle of pills, overdose, and within 5 minutes was calling 911 and trying to get help because I had already changed my mind. We deal with paranoia, which my paranoia, at first when they told me paranoia, I was thinking like space aliens and the government and stuff sort of paranoia, but it's much more insidious than that. It's more like a social paranoia. So I would be worried about what other people thought about me. And a lot of this, especially in the car when I was driving, I'd be kind of obsessed about what other drivers were thinking about my driving, even if I wasn't doing anything particular to bring attention to my driving, to the point that it interfered with my ability to drive because I was so worried about other people's opinions about my driving. Another symptom of BPD is boredom, which you guys might refer to as normal, because we're so used to being at the extreme emotions that when things kind of settle down and are just kind of normal, we get bored. We get bored really easy. And I'm seeing really a relationship between boredom and BPD, and also between my chronic pain as well. So they really kind of feed off of each other. We struggle with feelings of emptiness, and this is due to having an unstable self-image. Our unstable self-image is we don't really know who exactly we are. I'll be talking about DBT later. So I have an unstable self-image. So I would always be in relationships, and I would really mold myself to fit what my partner wanted me to be. I wasn't really my own person. In each relationship, I kind of became a different version of Andy, and that made me highly manipulated in a lot of abusive relationships. I also, a lot of times due to boredom, I kind of skipped over this, would lead to self-destructive behavior, which is really, really intense with people with BPD, and self-destructive behavior can be considered self-harm, substance abuse, overspending, shoplifting, promiscuous sex, dangerous driving, anything that would endanger yourself. And that's kind of the way we would cope, or I would cope with my illness. Mine was mostly substance abuse and self-harm. but later I would learn better coping mechanisms. Other symptoms suffer from are black or white thinking and idealization and devaluation, which means I love you or I hate you. There was no in between. You were either my best friend or my worst enemy. You couldn't just be an acquaintance or anything like that. Some of the other symptoms we dealt with are mind reading, predicting the future, catastrophizing, where I would make everything into a huge blown up catastrophe. I had a lot of people with, it's worth bringing up, non-confrontational and passive, so all my anger that I had, I would turn inward and beat myself up, but a lot of people with BPD like to express their anger outward and can become violent, but that's not my experience. My experience has been turning the anger inward, but I know a lot of people with BPD also express their anger outwards as well. Another symptom of BPD is suicide attempts or suicide ideation. People with BPD have one of the highest rates of suicide of all the mental illnesses, as 1 in 10 BPDs successfully commit suicide. It is Suicide Awareness Month, and World Suicide Prevention Day is September 10th. So I would say to anyone who is suicidal that you are not alone, and I understand that your pain is very, very real. And you have come this far, but not just to come this far. You have further to go, and you can get help. And with help, there's relief from that pain you're feeling right now. And it doesn't have to be the end, because I know a lot of times when I was suicidal, it was to escape the pain, not because I really wanted to die. So what got me, so I wasn't suicidal anymore, and so I wasn't attempting anymore, which I haven't had an attempt since 2012, was learning coping skills for dealing with my pain, and that's how I was able to overcome my suicidal ideation. So there's a lot of mental illness stigma out there, but it's even worse for BPD. People with BPD are considered bad people. A lot of people relate us to the movie Fatal Attraction with Glenn Close's character Alex, even though the director and Glenn Close have said she does not have BPD. People think of us as think of her as BPD and immediately associate us with boiling bunnies. So that is not the case. We are notoriously bad patients because we're resistant to change. And I've actually been denied treatment on my diagnosis alone, where I called a psychiatrist's office, gave them my name, they asked me what I was being treated for, I said BPD, and they said, oh, your case is too complicated for us. So they wouldn't even try to help me because I had BPD. And I've heard that story from a lot of people with BPD. But borderline personality disorder is treatable. It's not curable, but it is treatable, and you can learn to live with it. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm living in recovery from it. There's no one medication to treat BPD. No one pill that fixes it all, unfortunately, though I was really hoping there was. There are medications to help lessen the symptoms, like antidepressants and mood stabilizers. I also take sleep medication for horrible insomnia, and I have ADHD as well. The most effective thing for people with BPD is therapy. So cognitive behavior therapy, mentalization-based treatment, acceptance and commitment therapy, and my favorite, and what worked for me, dialectical behavior therapy. And I'll just refer to dialectical behavior therapy as DBT. And DBT really changed my life. It's a really intensive program. There's a high dropout rate because it's hard. It's really hard work, especially if you're resistant to change. For me, when I finally got into DBT, I really threw myself into the program. I was 100% committed to change because I could not live that life I was living anymore. I was in so much emotional turmoil all the time. I could not cope with that anymore, and I was willing to do anything I could to get better. If they had told me voodoo would have made me better, I would have done voodoo. Luckily, DBT was better than voodoo. In DBT, you have individual sessions with your therapist that are kind of built around these worksheets that you do every day called diary cards, where you write down your emotions and rate them on a scale of 0 to 5. past using a medicine makes my mouth water, I always have a bottle of water, or makes my mouth dry, so I always have a bottle of water with me. It's my best friend. So we do worksheets every day. So on the daily worksheets, I'm glad we have some counselors here, because people really need to understand what BPD is like. There's a weekly group therapy, but it's more like a classroom setting. You don't really share a lot of personal information. Each group, you learn about a new skill, then you get homework on practicing that skill, and then in your individual session, they'll look at your diary card and be like, okay, well, this day your emotions were really high, your anger was really high, what happened this day? And that was one of the things that was really, important for me for DBT, was that it was so structured and rigid, because when I was in CBT and it was kind of free form, I would kind of sneak my way into talking about other people instead of working on myself. So the rigidity of DBT and the everyday homework and such really gave me a sense, like a schedule and a way to live life, which really helped. So what really helped me get into recovery was DBT. Obviously, was a huge part. I still do therapy, do CBT. I've done a lot of group therapy for PTSD, for obviously the DBT therapy. A lot of my social supports have been really important, and those are both online and offline, which I'm sure some of you guys are watching. I love you. So I also work with a peer specialist, which I also am a peer specialist, and what a peer specialist does is we use our lived experience to help others with their recovery. We don't really give advice, we don't tell you what you should do, but we just help you reframe things and kind of give you a sounding board to talk about your problems with somebody else who's lived through mental illness. So now I'm using my platform to try to end the stigma about BPD and provide hope for people who are living with BPD, that it won't always be as terrible as it is. I still have borderline personality disorder, and every day is recovery. There's not a finish line where I reach and it's like, now I'm not BPD anymore and I am recovered. Recovery is an everyday process. It's something I have to work on all the time. Every minute I have to be checking my thoughts and be focused on making sure I'm not distorting my thoughts in any way of explanation. So I would say that recovery is the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life, but is also so very worth it. That's why I'm here today to talk about BPD. That's kind of my introduction. Do you guys have questions for me? I see some of my fellow In Our Own Voice presenters are here from NAMI. Thanks, guys, for coming and supporting me. While you guys are thinking of some questions, one of the things that people often ask me is, what is the difference between borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder, which is very important to know. Bipolar disorder is a mood disorder where there is a chemical problem in your brain where you fluctuate between manic and depressive states. That's how it is with bipolar disorder, and they are either, they might have rapid cycling, but usually their moods last for a couple of days, while my moods might last 5 minutes. My moods might switch between extremes at different times. So bipolar is much more treatable with medication, while BPD it affects everything in our entire personality. And while bipolar affects your emotions, your emotional liability. So the treatments are very different. It's a really huge pet peeve of mine when people say, feeling so bipolar right now, because one, minimizing a very serious illness. If he comes back, I'll show him, but he ran away and he's like under the bed or something. But they're minimizing a very serious illness, and two, they're not minimizing the right illness, because bipolars don't fluctuate mood as quickly as borderline does, and that's what people usually think of with bipolar, is the constantly fluctuating mood. So questions, not about my cat. Borderline personality disorder, usually the onset age is about early teens to mid-20s. Mine came about 24 or 25 years old, but it could come much later. It can come much later in life, but usually it comes in the mid-20s. You will first start seeing symptoms, though, as a teenager, but it's really difficult to tell, because what I always say is I was a teenager till I was 28 years old, because all the symptoms of BPD are acting like a teenager does. So I was going with that. So I was feeling like a lot of that. Well, I'm not here to decide whether you should be on medication or not. That's something that a doctor would help you with. That's a personal decision, and it depends on your diagnosis. It's rare, but you can have bipolar and borderline. You can have bipolar and borderline. It's just difficult for people to really tell the difference, and for doctors to figure out exactly which one you fall into. Some people have both. Some people they're very commonly misdiagnosed as well. I've been misdiagnosed with bipolar as well. Let's see. Talk about parasitic living. What do you mean by parasitic living? Like, I'm sorry that you can hardly hear me. I'll talk a little louder. Parasitic living, do you mean there are, the way we kind of have to live with someone else's, kind of take on other people's identity? I think a lot of personality disorders kind of cross paths. There's a lot of each personality disorder within each other. Narcissistic personality disorder is much more nothing is my fault and I am perfect, while borderline is much more everything is my fault and I am flawed. To family and friends who want to support someone, that's a really important thing. You have to educate yourself, and it's really important to also take care of yourself, because it's really hard living with us. I was not easy to live with, I promise. I was not a great person to live for a long time, but so I would recommend, first off, take care of yourself. If you live with someone with BPD, you have to be willing to help. You have to be willing to treat yourself before you can really help others. So really educating yourself is really important. You need to, if you're just knowing some of the symptoms of BPD can really help you understand why we're acting how we are, or how we're acting. It can really help you kind of make sense of what we're doing, because it might feel like we're doing things out of anger or manipulation, but we're really just trying to cope the best we can. Some coping strategies that really helped me. First off, getting a support network. That was huge, because for so long I isolated. I did not talk to anyone. I stayed at home and played on the computer all the time, which you can have supports from people online, but it's also important to have supports from people offline as well. I met a lot of the people that support me through support groups, which are wonderful, which NAMI offers some great support groups for both family members of people with mental illnesses and for the people with mental illnesses themselves. They're separate groups. So I recommend that you look those up. Different programs offer different support groups. So I met a lot of people in support groups. Having a lot of support people who understand my diagnosis and I can talk to has been a huge part of my recovery. A lot of the coping skills I use actually come from dialectical behavior therapy. My favorite coping skill probably is temperature change. When I get super distressed or I feel like I'm going to have a panic attack or something, I like to grab 2 ice cubes and hold them in my hand as long as possible, but until I can't take it anymore. And that just gives a quick shock to my brain and allows me to kind of come down from whatever emotion I was losing control over. That's one of my favorite coping skills to use when I'm super distressed. If other ones are distracting myself, changing the senses, using different sensory, well, I'm sure she would be fine with me plugging her. This is a mental health awareness charm that was made by my sister, who runs A1 Creations Facebook page, and she makes jewelry. She made this for me for my birthday, and it's got little green beads on it for mental health. Yes, self-care is very important and is a very important aspect of taking care of this disorder. And in all mental health disorders, we call them the PLEASE skills in DBT, and that's taking care of your physical illness, make sure you're eating appropriately, making sure you're sleeping appropriately, taking your medications, avoid mind-altering substances. I had been in treatment for years with depression before I got the diagnosis of BPD. And once I found out I had BPD, I quickly got into DBT as quickly as possible. I luckily didn't have to wait terribly long, but it was quite expensive and was totally worth it for me, because it really made a difference. I don't know a lot about paranoid schizophrenia. I would love to give you more information about that. I'm sure you can find more on the Mighty, but that's not something I had to deal with, so I can't really help you there. Well, I'm glad you're still here, Jessica. I know what that pain is like. I've been there. And it's important to get help. It's important to have people that support you. Thank you about charm. I requested it for my birthday. My sister makes jewelry, so she made it for me. One of the questions I got asked is, how has this affected my life? It's affected everything. It's completely changed my life. First off, for so long I couldn't manage interpersonal relationships very well. I couldn't manage my emotions. It completely threw me off the track I was being a graphic designer, being a web designer. And it really put me into a really bad place for a really long time, and I just ended up staying, at home by myself. But once I started going into recovery, I actually really didn't want to do group therapy. When they first suggested it, I told my therapist, hell no, I won't do that, because of my social anxiety. But it was important for me to do the group therapy, and it ended up making me actually much more of an extrovert than I used to be, and now hasn't changed my entire track of life. That now instead of doing work as a graphic designer, which I sometimes do a little bit, but mostly I work on educating people about mental illness and talking about BPD. So now I have a completely different view of life and a completely different life track based on what's going on with my mental illness, and I'm here to provide hope for people that recovery is possible. I just had a question of treating my addiction. My addiction really came from the BPD. If I had not had bipolar disorder or personality disorder, I don't think I would have really had to deal with the addiction, because the addiction was a way of coping with those emotions that I didn't know how to handle. So it was really, they kind of had to go together and track together. I tried doing AA and NA, but I didn't find them to be as helpful as DBT was. Using the coping skills with DBT has been really helpful for treating my addiction, for dealing with urges, and that's again something that I have to work on an almost daily basis, is not falling behind and falling into that trap again. So that's part of recovery as well. Some of the books that I find helpful, I was told one of the best books is The Borderline Personality Disorder Survival Guide, which is what I read to get my diagnosis, because when they first told me I had BPD, I was like, nah, no, my personality is great and wonderful, and I'm not messed up, you are. So what my therapist did was she told me to get a book on BPD and highlight anything I agreed with. So happened to pick up the BPD Survival Guide and went through and highlighted half the book. Just totally covered the book in highlighting. And that was what I brought to my psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist was like, wow, you really identify with this disorder, and that's how we were able to diagnose me with BPD. Mindfulness for Borderline Personality Disorder is a really good BPD book. I do not recommend you read Stop Walking on Eggshells. I have not read it, but I have heard it's very judgmental towards people with BPD and will make you quite unhappy. So I have not read it and don't recommend read it. I'm asking questions about DBT. DBT is therapy for borderline personality disorder. It's very intensive. It's made up of 4 different parts, which is individual therapy, group therapy, phone coaching, and then the therapists actually do therapy for themselves, therapy with other therapists. It's not actually therapy, but it's a point where they all meet together and kind of discuss their clients and kind of come up with strategies for helping people who are in trouble. So with individual therapy, sorry, my lip is really bothering me. You have a focus on what's been going on that week. You don't talk a lot about your past. You don't talk a lot about things that aren't relevant. They want you to deal with what's going on right now. And so they look over the past week where you've given them a diary card or just a sheet of paper that has a list of your emotions, and you rate your emotions in intensity each day. And then the therapist will look at your diary card and go, oh, I see on Tuesday your anger was very high. What was going on that day? And you talk about what was going on that day, talk about coping skills you could have used, talk about ways of dealing with that anger. Excuse me. You can also the next part is the group therapy, which isn't so much group therapy what you normally expect, where you share a lot. It's more like a class where you learn a new skill each week, because DBT is all based on skills. So each skill has one class associated with it, and then you get homework to practice that skill. And then you go home, and during the week you practice it. And then you bring it back next week and you share homework with the group, how you practice the skill. Then you have phone coaching, which is you can contact your therapist 24/7. That doesn't mean that they'll necessarily answer, but they are available and they'll get back to you as soon as they can. You're not supposed to call with like crisis calls, but more like, and not to rant or bitch about anything, but to call and figure out the best way to cope. You would still, of course, go to the hospital if you were if you were in severe crisis. I don't know about I Hate You, Don't Leave Me. I haven't read it, so I'm not sure about that one. Youth is great. Love music. And no, I don't have any children. I don't want children. I have actually having a very exciting hysterectomy this week because of endometriosis. One of the other questions that is up here is how I've been doing lately, which is actually not as great as I had been, because I have been having trouble with my physical health and waiting for the surgery to come up. I haven't been able to go out and volunteer with NAMI like I had been doing, which was a huge coping skill for me. And so it's kind of set me back a little bit, not being able to help others as much, which is why am happy to have this opportunity to share my story. I've also been doing video podcasts talking about borderline personality disorder to give me a place to go. I do take medication I take an antidepressant, a mood stabilizer. I used to take anxiety medication, but I don't need it anymore. And I don't want to talk about specific names of medication, just because I don't want to. Each person is very different, has a different body chemistry. So each person needs different medications, and a psychiatrist is really the person to talk to about medications. I would like to write a book myself, a memoir about what I've lived through with DBT and BPD. Right now I'm kind of sharing my story through YouTube and doing videos, but eventually maybe writing a book, that would be very cool. Opiates and alcohol and some other substances as well. I definitely struggled with multiple addictions. It definitely affected my ability to work because I became so emotional during work that I couldn't concentrate. I would often have to leave work. I'd get really upset if my boss critiqued me, even the slightest, and it made it very difficult. And after my suicide attempt, I was actually put on disability, so I wasn't working. Now I am starting to get back into work, and it's been really helpful having that structure. As I said, I volunteer work for NAMI, so I volunteer, and being able to share my story is really helping with my coping skills. Thank you for sharing my videos, Mary. That's very helpful. I appreciate that. Yes, 90s alternative rock definitely helps with BPD. Rudy's making fun of my music choices. I happen to love alternative rock music from the 90s. It's my favorite genre. Thank you, Nika. That's why I do it, is because I know not everyone can talk about their illnesses because of the stigma. There's still people who can't leave, who can't tell their church or can't tell their job, and so I like to be that voice for the people who can't talk about it. I mean, the best way to support people with BPD and acute patient psych care is really just listening to their stories and not invalidating them, but just revalidating them, reassuring them that their symptoms are real, that what they're dealing with is a real issue. That for a long time I didn't feel I had that I was given the stuff to. I was given any validation that I could really cope with my illness. To someone who was, I'm sorry, what was that? The most important thing I learned about coping with suicide was the coping skills that I learned through therapy and getting support network. Living with my illness, it was really hard, and I attempted suicide many times. I was hospitalized 10 times in 2011 for suicidal attempts or suicidal ideation. So once I started getting into dialectical behavior therapy and gaining the coping skills and the knowledge, that was a big part of helping with my suicidal ideation. There's a lot of distortions with my disorder where what I'm thinking isn't exactly in line with the truth. So it really helps if I can recognize where my thought distortions are lying. And doing therapy was a really important part of that, is to learning where my distortions are. I do not know if there's a commonality between women with BPD and uterine issues. Endometriosis affects 10% of women, so it's a pretty large majority, while BPD affects more like 3 to 5% of women. It looks like Gabby's coming back, everyone. Let's say hi to Gabby. Everyone has to see you, Gabby. He's back. Look at the camera. There you go. And he's another part of my coping skill, who's, at one point, my therapist, I moved to another apartment complex and they wouldn't allow animals unless they were therapy animals, so my therapist wrote me a cat prescription, which was basically a letter that said that my cat was part of my coping skills and necessary for my treatment. So he's been with me the whole time. He's my little baby boy. Oh, you are cute. Look at you showing off for the camera. They're liking it too. They are liking it. They are liking it. Animals can be wonderful companions and wonderful parts of coping with your illness. And they give you something to be accountable to. So you can't just lie in bed all day, because he'll sit there and scream at me and demand food and water and things that, you know, cats need. I was frowning? I wasn't trying to frown. I'm sorry. Yeah, he's my little boy. He's my good boy. Yes, cat script for cat. That's what I called him, my cat prescription. When I had attempted, the first time I did not go for help for a long time, for about 12 hours, which is why it was so serious. But later attempts, I would do it almost immediately. I would get upset, have an attempt, and then 5 minutes later call 911 and try to get help. So some of my attempts were very impulsive. They weren't, I didn't really want to die. I just didn't know how to cope in that moment with the emotions I was dealing with. You're welcome. I'm glad to share my story with you, and it's good that you're so supportive of your sons. He is very handsome. He's purring quite a bit. He's very happy to be here. Do I have any other questions I can answer today? Because I'm happy to talk about it. Alright, he's going to lay down now. He's done being in front of the camera. Well, if I don't have any more questions today, I guess we have another one. Yeah, isolating is really hard, and I have a tendency to isolate when I'm struggling as well, and it's not good for you to do so. So reaching out a support group is a great way to get help. Is a great way to meet people, to get out of the house, and that's the first way I got out, was with a support group. Someone asked me about the turning point in me getting better. After I had been in BPD or DBT for a while, there's so many initials. So when I've been in DBT for a while, that's when I really started noticing a change in the way I was thinking, and I was able to notice when I was having thought distortions and things like that. That was the really big turning point. For someone just entering DBT, I recommend that you hang in there, because it is not easy. It's not going to be a piece of cake to get through. It involves a lot of work and changing basically everything about the way you think, which is hard to do. And so to hang in there and to really put your effort into DBT, because I really think it can help you out. If you want to get started with NAMI, just contact your local branch, which you can look up on Google. And just tell them that you would like to volunteer, and they'll find a place for you. We always need help. I'm in Virginia, just outside of Richmond, so I volunteer with NAMI Central Virginia. Hello for the people who just came in. Dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, is one of the main treatments for borderline personality disorder. Well, if you're still having symptoms, you could definitely still get help. It sounds like that you might be talking more about trauma, which you can definitely get help for. So, yeah, I definitely recommend looking into getting help. DBT is dialectical behavior therapy, which is therapy for borderline personality disorder. It's very intensive and involves a lot of change and coping skills, anything like that. my family and friends, they were really supportive of my attempt, after my attempts, because I felt like I was a burden on them, and that's what I told them after my first attempt. But it was hard. I mean, they didn't really know a lot about mental illness. They never dealt with severe mental illness before. They really had to educate themselves. BPD is a personality disorder, kind of. The overall thing is emotional dysregulation, where we have trouble regulating our emotions, and we feel emotions more extreme than other people do. But so when we try to show our emotions, we end up doing it over the top, and it's really difficult for people to deal with. If you watch it, I went through all the symptoms. Probably easier just to watch everything again, because there's a lot of different symptoms, and there's 256 different makeups for symptoms of BPD. Suggestions for a friend or loved one who has suicidal ideation. To educate yourself the best you can, if you have a loved one that has suicidal ideation, to educate yourself on how to help them best. There's a great program called ASSIST, which is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training, which is about dealing with people in suicidal crisis, and I've taken the class. It's a great class, and it tells you exactly how to approach someone with suicidal ideation. The first step is always to ask them. Ask if they are feeling suicidal. You will not put the idea in their head. If they are at that point, they already have thought about it. So if you are just giving them a platform to actually start talking about it. So it's just to be there for them, to listen, to not judge them, to not try to say, oh, it'll get better, or just like push away the illness as not being as important and as big as it is, but to really support them. I do practice CBT and DBT. And yes, DBT is unfortunately not as available as I wish it was. Actually, when I went to do it, there was only one private program in the state of Virginia. There's more now, but so I went to one of the founding places in Virginia, and it was really, really helpful. But there's also online, there's a program called DBT Path, which I think is dbtpath.com, and it's online DBT therapy. I've heard good things about it. I haven't done it personally, but it might be something to check out. Well, I'm glad that I was able to describe it. I would look more into BPD and see if it's something that you feel you can relate to, and bring it up with your doctors and talk to them and see if maybe that's a diagnosis. I have not done ECT or TMS. I have not needed either of those. DBT, Dialectical Behavior Therapy. Thank you for having me. Dialectical Behavior Therapy, DBT. You're welcome. Thank you for following me today. I really appreciate it. You can follow me on Twitter at AndyBPD Warrior, or look up on YouTube BPD Warrior, or on Facebook I'm just Andy Crispin. How to help a first-time temp teen? I'm not sure. I don't work with a lot of teenagers. I'm not sure what sort of advice to give, except for to listen and validate how they're feeling, and really really make them feel comfortable with sharing and talking about their illness, because I know I wasn't given that freedom to talk about mine. Well, I'm here just to help people, to provide hope, and to let people know that recovery is possible. People with BP are sometimes referred to as a lost cause, and we are far from a lost cause. My cat is Gabby. He's a boy, but I thought he was rolling on the little tiny baby cat, and he was really loud, so I named him Gabby. Turned out to be a boy, but he knew his name, so I stuck with it. All right, looks like we're getting done with the questions. Thanks, guys, for having me today, and thanks to Mighty for letting me speak. I was completely honored. I hope you guys will follow me on YouTube and Twitter, and I hope to hear back from you guys. And thanks for your support. Remember to keep fighting, BPD warriors. Keep